Hello and welcome to fourth grade social studies. Uh, Boys and girls, come on in. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good recess. We need you to sit down and take out your Nebraska history books. I'll need you to do this quietly and I'll need you to do it by the count of 5, starting now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. If you will get out your Nebraska history books and turn to the to the end of chapter 3, we'll do a little review before we jump into our lesson today. So I need you to turn your books to page 69. We're going to end chapter 3, which was all about the geography of Nebraska. If you remember from yesterday, before we had our test, we were discussing the geography of Nebraska and shaping the land and how our state of Nebraska now is actually in the grasslands of the Great Plains. Do you remember that? And we talked about Nebraska having several different regions in it. Those regions we discussed were actually here we have the Salt Flats in western Nebraska, moving into the Sand Hills in central Nebraska, and then out to the east part we talked about how that changes into rolling hills and a more heavily wooded area. And then we started talking about how things were changing, that soon the Native Americans that were here would be introduced to white settlers that came from Europe. So let's move into chapter 4 and get started on today's lesson. Chapter 4 is on page 70. Here, the title of that is Native Americans on the Plains. Native Americans on the Plains between 1300 and 1800. Once we get into chapter 4, we are going to know that our objectives are to discuss Native American homes, types of materials and tools that Native Americans would use, and probably talk a little bit about their hunting ground, what their farms might have been like, and their dwellings. So let's jump into that and see what we can come up with. We will also describe the unique characteristics of each of the Plains tribes in Nebraska. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We will note that there are Pawnee, Omaha, Ponca, Ote, Missouri, Lakota, Arapaho, and Cheyenne that lived and shared and coexisted peacefully for the most part in what is now modern day Nebraska. We need to also identify the purpose of a buffalo hunt and realize that no part of the buffalo is wasted. Buffaloes, as you remember, they were large mammals that lived in our region. They shared that ecosystem with the Native Americans, the indigenous people. We need to discover and value what role the buffalo played and how much life they gave to indigenous people. So let's get started. Today, Nebraska is home to many Native Americans. Their ancestors lived in this country long ago, before any settlers came to the land. On the plains, the native people made their own trails They didn't have streets, but they had paths that they would walk frequently, and that helped them to navigate themselves so that they didn't get lost. You wouldn't want several of your family members to get lost. So they hunted animals like buffalo, elk, and deer for food and clothing, and people built homes. They didn't live in tents, and they certainly didn't live in brick buildings, but they built homes from the earth and from buffalo hides. A native people kept alive a rich culture with many traditions. So far, do we have any questions? Show your hand if you have a question. Okay, we will keep moving on then. Turn your pages to, move forward to page 74. There were two different lifestyles on the plains. We had some people living one way and another people on the eastern part of this estate, they were living a different way. So on this side of the state, we had the Lakota Sioux. They were primarily in the northern part of Nebraska. We had another tribe of Indians. They were the Arapaho and some Cheyenne. And they primarily lived and kept just to the south of the North Platte River. We had a small tribe. They were Ponca. Now, they've been around for a long time, but they were relatively small. We had the Omaha, which is in the same area as modern-day Omaha. They were a separate tribe, and they had different cultures, different practices, a different method of cooking, dressed a little bit different. And then we also have the Oat to the southeast, and we have the Pawnee, which is more south-central. Well, the Indians on this side, the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, they are called nomadic tribes. Now, the people in the nomadic tribes, they lived in teepees. What's a teepee? We're going to learn about it. The people on the eastern side of the state, they were more farmers. They stayed primarily in the same spot year after year after year so that they could farm their land. While the other Indians, they traveled with the animals, primarily the buffalo. When the buffalo moved, they moved. So they weren't always in Nebraska. Sometimes they would visit Kansas. Sometimes they would even visit South Dakota and Wyoming to follow those buffaloes so that they could get the food they need. So let's talk about the farming tribes. Farming tribes lived in villages too, but their villages were permanent. During much of the year, the people lived in an earth lodge. Well, what is an earth lodge? Let's read on and we'll find out. Some homes were made of grass and dirt and tall, thick wooden poles. So they would mix dirt and they would mix grass and they would make this clay-type mud. And we're going to learn more about what that's called in the next coming pages. And they would use poles, long, tall poles, and then they would construct their home, and then they would fill it in with this mud dirt material, and then they would have what is called an earth lodge. Other lodges and poles and posts were put around them to support the round earth lodge. So it was much like the teepee too. We'll find that the teepee was round and the earth lodge becomes round. Why is it round, you ask? Well, Native Americans believed that circles were a part of what Mother Earth wanted us to live in. Earth was a sphere, so they practiced dining. They would sit down to dinner and they would sit in a circle. If they had long class talks, children, they would sit together in a circle. Or sometimes even the older men and women, they would sit in a circle together to discuss very important things. That way, everyone was equal. No one was left out or in the back row or in the front row. Before they had horses, the farming tribes made small brush or animal hide lodges when they traveled or hunted. After they got horses, people often lived in teepees during their hunting trips. They took their teepees with them and they brought them back to their villages. So the people on this side, they would take their teepees and they would go out and they would live there and then they might come back. But now the people here, they would build those earth lodges. They would travel out and travel for a few miles, but they would always go right back home. The Earth Lodge made a good home for the Omaha, Pawnee, Ponca, and Otoe, Missouri. Each round lodge was big enough for 20 to 40 people to live and sleep in. Sometimes two big families of grandparents, parents, and children lived in one lodge. That's an Earth Lodge. Turn your page to page 78. Let's talk about teepees. Let's look at those pictures and see what would be on the outside or the inside. What would the shape be? And what would the people look like? The teepee. The teepee made a great home for people on the move. It could be set up or taken down quickly. Women were responsible for making and taking care of teepees. Now, why is that, fourth graders, that women would be responsible for that? Are women primarily responsible for building houses now? You're right. No, they aren't. Most often it's men. But hundreds of years ago, why would it have been the woman? You're right, because the men had to go out and hunt, and they had to keep the women safe, so they had to go check the perimeter. You're right. They put the teepees up and took them down. The women did that. To make a teepee, women made a frame of tall poles. They took the, now follow along. I need your finger on the words. I need your eyes in your book. Thank you. They took the poles one by one and leaned them together at the top. They spaced the poles to form a big circle on the ground, and then they stretched the teepee over the round poles. The cover, the outside cover of that teepee, well, it's not bricks. That's right, yes. Yes, the book tells us that it was made of buffalo hides that were sewn together. It took about 12 buffalo hides to make one teepee cover. Making a good teepee was an art. The poles had to lean together just right so that they did not fall over. Now remember, yesterday we talked a little bit about animals and how some animals lived indoors, some outdoors, and some both. And we talked about how sometimes horses, they were really valuable and they got to live inside. Do you think a horse was able to live in a teepee? Yes, absolutely. You are right. Teepees aren't very large, so a horse wouldn't be able to live inside with the people. Thank you. A teepee cover had to fit just right to keep the wind and rain out. People drew symbols on special teepees. A teepee might have drawings that told of good hunts or of other special things. Now let's think about that. So back when Native Americans were very rich and they had a high population of people, they drew on their houses. Now, would we paint on a house today? That's right, no, you would get grounded. But some things back then were different, and some things now are much different. So just know that things change over a period of time. We wouldn't decorate our houses today. So let's take a look at that. What would be inside of a teepee? Yep, a bed. And do you suppose they would have blankets? Yes. What would the blankets be made out of? Nice. I see that you learned from chapter 3. Yes, they would be made from buffalo. Yes. And if you look at this picture, way in the back, way in the back, you'll see some people riding horses in the back. What do you suppose they're doing? No, no, they're not in a river. No, they are called scouts, are braves. They would keep the people safe. Yes, thank you. Well, now we've reached our objective for the day. We needed to learn about earth lodges. We needed to learn about teepees. And we also needed to do a little bit of review. Now that that's all done, it's going to be your choice today. You get to lead your learning. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You will have to do something, but the work is your choice. You will have the option to either complete a tribe name word search, and on the back, yes, you will see that you have your word bank. Yes. You will need to get that completed within the next 10 minutes or take it home for homework. Or you have the other choice, for those of you who enjoy going back and reviewing your books, you will be able to go through a timeline and understand what was happening at different points in Nebraska's history. Not only with Native Americans, but also with the new settlers that were coming in. So your choice, again, you can do one or the other. I will need you to work alone. Or separately. No, I'm sorry. I need you to work alone. As we dwindle down on time, then if we need to partner up and you're doing well working independently, we can do that. In the meantime, I'm going to put this on the overhead and work through some of the word search with you because I know that's a little confusing for some of you. Those of you who are using your book, I will also be available to help you locate that text information that you're going to be needing. So, before we get started on that, and yes, you'll be able to use the restroom, but before that, I would just like to ask you a couple of questions about your learning today. The people's needs. So they had earth lodges. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you that dirt and straw, when you mix that together, that is called, I'm sorry about this. I'm sorry, hang in there with me, everybody. Oh, I am so sorry. Let me go back and review quickly. That was, okay, technology today. We might as well use it. It's at our fingertips. Let me check that. Yes, go ahead and get started on that word search while I find this answer for you. Yeah, yep, that timeline, go ahead. What were earth lodges made from? Sod. That was it. So if you mix a type of dirt that has a lot of clay in it with grass, you can make sod. And that's what gives you those real hard, thick walls that will either keep the hot out or the cold out. So sorry about that. I forgot that. Okay. So what did they need? Native Americans. the Indians, what did they need here? If you were living on the east, what is it that you needed so that you could stay there and live? An earth lodge. Yes, yes, you needed an earth lodge because you were planting. You were probably planting corn. You may be planting potatoes, but you're going to need a dwelling to keep you there and protect you. What kind of dwelling did you need if you were living on the western part of Nebraska? A teepee, right, because? Yes, because you were moving with the animals. You didn't necessarily stay in the same place. Yes. What else do you think they needed? Yes, they needed fire. Yes. What else? Oh, yeah, you're right. They needed someone to take care of them. Yes, the grandmothers, the mothers, they were very important, and so were the fathers, because the fathers had to teach them important lessons. Yes. So if there was weather, because we live in Nebraska today and there's severe weather, what do you think they did if there was a tornado? If there was a tornado and you were living on the eastern part of Nebraska and you were an Omaha Indian, or if you were a Ponca Indian, what do you suppose you would do? Oh, yes, you could. There's lots of hills over here. So you could, yep, you could try and hide behind a hill, maybe like in some rocks, maybe in a outcrop of rocks. Or you could go real low because there's rivers here. You could do that. hmm And if you were on the plains and you were faced with a tornado, what do you suppose they did? Yes, that's right. We went over that in the lesson before this. They actually dug holes in the ground, remember? Remember? And they would store their extra clothing and their extra food in those holes so that they could cover them up and the animals and other Indians couldn't come and take their stuff. Well, do you suppose they took all that out and they got in the holes themselves so that they would be safe on that flat land? Well, of course they did. Yes, they went underground for that weather. So just some tad bits, some random things that we need to talk about before we know this lesson is really, really set. You really understand this. Can present and future generations live in harmony with nature? The Indians did. We know they lived with the buffalo and they lived with the deer and the wolves, and we know that the deer and the wolves, that and they lived in harmony with them. Do you think we can do that again? Yeah, it would be hard to live in a teepee. No, we don't necessarily have to go back to living in teepees. Yes, we can. Yes, that's right. Remember, you told me you've seen that buffalo in Kansas. Those people are taking care of the buffaloes. They are respecting the animals. And yes, we can bring them back. So it is possible. We can do it if we try. Okay, we need to get moving on because I know that you've got science coming up next. So your choice, word search or understanding a timeline. Come pick up your packet, have a seat, and get busy. Yes, I'll answer all your questions.